Welcome to the Contact Podcast.
Oh yeah, baby.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Call Text Podcast. I'm your host, Donovan Jones. So I'm going to be completely upfront and honest with you guys. You know, I try every single week to come on here and be as transparent as possible with the topics, the areas that I speak upon. I try to be as factual as possible, and I try to be as forthcoming and transparent as I can be. And so if I'm going to continue to do that, I have to kind of take you guys behind the curtain and kind of explain where the passion kind of comes from tonight, because I'm very fired up today. So I don't really know how this is going to go because I don't really have a ton of notes. Up until last night, I had a topic in my mind of what exactly I wanted to talk about, and I had all these videos and I had all these scriptures that I was going to use. But then something happened yesterday that I felt like God was telling me, okay, you need to talk about this. And more frequently, I'm trying to, on this podcast, relay what I feel like God is calling me to do, which is to build people's faith, encourage people, and point people to Him, not just through the podcast, but the way that I live my life. Every single thing that I do, I want to point people to Jesus. I want people to look at the things God is doing in my life and say, oh, wait, God didn't just work in Bible times. Like, God still does stuff today. And if He's doing stuff in this dude's life, there's no reason why He won't do stuff in my life if I give things up to Him. If I give my life over to Him, if I give ownership to Him, if I say, Lord, use me, He's going to. And so I just have a little bit of testimony to share with you guys of things that have happened over really the last 2 or 3 weeks that I haven't shared on here. And so I believe that the testimonies that God gives us aren't just for us to white knuckle and to hold on to and to have our faith built, but it's to share with other people. And so that's what I'm going to try to do through this episode the best that I can. And how the episode switched, the topic, and I'm sure I'm going to talk about what I had planned on a different date. We went to it, as I record right now, it's Saturday night, August 3rd. Shout out to my sister, my little sister, Hannah. Her birthday is today, so she is 28 years old. Saturday, August 3rd, as I sit here and record. So special shout out to my sister. I love you. I'm very proud of you as a mother and as just a woman, has a very, very kind, caring heart. And so shout out to her. But we went down to the river yesterday. My wife's parents built a little cabin down on the river. I think I've talked about it on past episodes, and we go down there every once in a while. And so we went down there to spend the night. Last night, and one of our good friends, Angie Beaver, she texted me and text Kelly, and she said, "Hey, does Donovan need a desk?" And so I guess I've never really talked about it on here before, but up until today, as I sit right here, and you might kind of, if you're watching this on YouTube, you might kind of see me touching around because honestly, I've never had like a desk, like a legit desk. It was never really something I thought about, never really something that I cared about up until I started doing the podcast 2 years ago. And my wife homeschools the kids, and so she, man, God is just so good. She was using this table for the longest time, and then she stopped using it. She started using the kitchen island upstairs in our kitchen to do her homeschooling stuff. And so she said, this was like around 2 years ago when I started the podcast. She said, "Do you want to use that table?" And so I've been using just a table and a homeschool chair up until right now. Angie said that her husband, Tim, shout out to both of those guys. We love them so much. They're such a big encouragement in our lives. They go to church with us. So she said, Tim is going to get a new desk. Does Donovan want? She texted me and she texted Kelly. I didn't see it because I was getting the boys showers and stuff, but getting them ready for bed. And so she texted Kelly and was like, does Donovan want this desk? And then afterwards, I saw that she had tried to call me, so I called her back, and she's like, "Hey, do you want this desk? You know, Tim's getting a new one, and we'll give it to you and an office chair." And I was like, absolutely, that would be a huge blessing. And so I went there tonight and picked it up from them. And when I was on the way, I got a little bit emotional, and I texted my mom a picture of the desk after I got it and stuff. And it's really got me thinking a lot, because when I started doing this podcast, and I've said it before, I was literally in our driveway in my truck talking into my phone. Right? The very first episode that I recorded, I didn't have this microphone. And I know I don't have the best setup in the world, but it doesn't matter because I'm being consistent where I am right now. And maybe you're watching this right now and you feel like, okay, I'm starting something, but it's been 6 months, it's been a year, it's been 2 years, and I'm not seeing anywhere close to what I want to do, like taking place. Stay consistent in what you're doing, because God sees your work And where are you going to be 5 years from now really is determined by what you do right now. And so we're going to talk about all that today. Everything is going to kind of, hopefully I'm going to be able to tie it all together. Like I said, I don't really have any notes prepared for this because this was all just spur of the moment and the Holy Spirit inspired. And so anyway, I got a little bit emotional because I remember sitting there like it was yesterday in my truck, just talking into my phone, right? I didn't have the microphone. I didn't have a laptop. I didn't have any of those things. All I had was I knew a calling on my life to do something. Right. And so I just used what I had and I was recording from my phone, and then I went from there. Kelly bought me this laptop. I moved in the house. I took one of my kids' bedrooms, they would all go upstairs. I would record in my son's bedroom, and then, whatever I needed to do, moving the microphone around. And now I finally have this studio space, but it's one of those things that you just stay consistent where you are and just watch, because we're going to read it here in a second, talking about sowing and reaping. We're going to look at Galatians and check that out scripturally speaking, because God has literally sown into the fabric of creation, the fabric of earth, the DNA of this earth, the law of sowing and reaping, and you will reap what you sow. We're going to talk about all that in a minute. But first, let's go ahead and get into our clip of the week. All right, so for our clip of the week, it's going to go into this episode. I'm going to explain it as we go. If you're not watching this on YouTube, we're going to watch a clip of Tom Brady. I'm not the biggest Tom Brady fan in the world until I saw this video. Now I'm more of a fan of him than I was before. But it's actually crazy because today's actually his birthday, August 3rd, and I did not know that until I looked up how many Super Bowls he won and how many MVPs he's won. So if you don't know anything about Tom Brady, widely regarded as one of the best, if not the greatest quarterback of all time, multiple Super Bowl victories, multiple MVPs. And so he kind of gives a little bit of his story here. So if you're not watching this on YouTube, if you're just listening, you'll be able to hear it. It shows some of his highlights and stuff, but you can kind of hear him talking over it in the background. So let's get into this clip, because this is a clip that I've really been thinking about a lot lately. And I want you guys to think about it in your own life. How can you apply it?
I didn't even play. I was the backup quarterback on a team that went 0-8. I wanted to go. I got offered a scholarship to UCLA, and then they turned me away at the last minute because another kid signed before me. And I really wanted to go to USC. That was probably my first choice, but they didn't want me either. They signed another kid. So then I went to Michigan. I showed up on campus as a freshman in the fall of 1995. I was the 7th quarterback on the depth chart. Here I go. I get picked by the New England Patriots in the 6th round, 199. And I always joke, when they called me, they said, Tom, hey, Thomas, Bill Belichick, pick you in the 6th round, like see Monday, like get ready to go. To the Patriots, and there are 3 quarterbacks ahead of me. Sound familiar? They keep 2 quarterbacks most of the time on an NFL roster now. Bill Belichick saw something in me that if I ever did get that position, and I told this to my best friend, who was one of my roommates in college, I said, if they ever put me on the field, they're never going to take me off the field. I'm just trying to tell you how I feel, I've been on tour.
He said, if they ever put me on the field, they're never going to take me off the field. I've been thinking about that a lot this week, and really last week, because like I said, I'm going to share with you guys some testimony, but I'm trying to think of even how to start. I guess I'm just going to start with this, because I know I've shared this before, but it's been a while. When I knew that God called me to do what I'm doing, I didn't know what all was going to come from it. I didn't know where all he had for me to go. I just knew that he was calling me to do something, and it led to the podcast. It's led to a lot of different things. But I remember one day in particular, and I don't remember the date. I have it written down in one of my journals, but one day in particular, I was driving down the road, and I think whenever God calls us to do specific things, oftentimes he calls us outside of our comfort zones to kind of get our attention, and to understand that he's going to call us to do things that we might think is weird, but it's necessary in faith building. It's necessary in your obedience walk with him. And I was driving down the road one day at work, and I felt like God was telling me, you need to get out of the truck and get on your knees and pray to me. And I remember telling him no, because I said it was weird. I'm like, that's not something that I'm going to do. That's not something I'm comfortable with. I'm not doing that. So later on that day, I go up on top of the mountain here on my route, and my truck breaks down. And so I get out and I call the mechanic, told him where I'm at. He's like, okay, I'll come up there and meet you, this and that. And so I felt like God was telling me in that moment, hey, now you have no excuse. You got nowhere to go. So you need to get down on your hands and knees out here and pray to me. And so I did. I felt weird. It felt awkward. And I did for a couple of minutes. And then my phone rang. And I answered it and I saw, whatever it was. And then from there it went to Instagram, and from there it went to, what's going on my Facebook and that kind of thing. And so I listened to God for a moment, but I did not listen like I should. This was on a Wednesday. The very next day was a Thursday, and knock on wood, thank God, I don't have a whole lot of truck issues. Usually I try to do the best that I can to make sure I'm taking care of my truck and I don't drive it real rough and things like that at work. And so the next day was a Thursday, and as I was going through the route, I got to this other section of town there in Chattanooga, and my truck broke down again 2 days in a row. And I felt in that moment like the Holy Spirit was like, you going to keep on? Like, I can keep doing this all day if you want to. And so I was like, okay, God, I'm leaving my phone in my truck this time. I'm not going to take it with me. I'm going to get out and just pray to you. And so I told the mechanic what the deal was, where I was at. And he's like, all right, I'll come meet you. So I got out of my truck, got on the other passenger side of my truck, and I got down on my knees. And I remember praying, and I just said, Lord, I don't know, exactly what you're trying to tell me in this time, what the deal is, what I need to be praying for. But I pray that you just open up my mind, open up my mind's ears, open up my spirit, open up all the things that I need to be able to take in what it is that you're trying to tell me in this moment. And so I was sitting there, and I remember being on my knees, and after a couple of minutes, I was just sitting there quiet, and I'm praying, and I'm like, Lord, help me not to trick myself to make up a calling or make up a voice in my head. Keep Satan away from me. And I was just repeating these things. And after a minute, I was just sitting there in silence. And I remember I said, Lord, I'm going to sit on my bottom now because my knees are starting to get sore from digging in this gravel. And as I sat down, just the thought came into my mind as I was sitting in this huge gravel parking lot that there was gravel everywhere. The day before, I had broke down on probably, I would say it was at least, 3 to 5 miles of just this long strip of just gravel road. And I just remember in that moment, the Holy Spirit was like, just like the story came to my mind of Abraham and the Lord telling him to look up at the stars, and that's how many descendants you're going to have. That story came to my mind, and I felt like in that moment, the Lord was telling me, that's how many people I'm going to allow you to reach with the gospel. Millions. Because of the gravel, like the number of the gravel, that's how many people I was going to be able to reach with the gospel. And I believed that. And we're 2 years in now, and I'm not anywhere near that type of number now. I mean, I've been blessed to be able to affect, a couple hundred people every week or whatever the case may be. But it's like the from hundreds to millions is a completely different thing. But I know that in my sowing, what I'm doing right now is going to prepare me for what is to come. And I do believe that when we look at the things that God has given us, when we cultivate it, do everything that we can to work on the calling that God has given us, and trusting that He's going to open that door whenever He sees fit. I think that the journey, in terms of how long it takes for you to get to where God opens that door inside of that calling that He has for you, the time that it takes to get to that point, I think, determines the longevity of whatever it is. So keep going. Don't stop. Keep pushing. Whatever it is that you feel like God is calling you to do in your life, keep pushing, because He has it for you. You just have to keep moving. You have to keep going. You have to keep growing. You have to keep experiencing those testimonies, because when you get to wherever that level is that God has for you, you have to have stories that show God's faithfulness. You have to have stories and be able to put confidence inside of people that say, man, God really did work in that guy's life. God really did work in that girl's life. And if God worked in their lives, He can work in my lives. And so I fast forward all that, beginning in 2020, whatever it was, 2022, when I started this podcast, the Lord, and I've talked about it before, the Lord opened a lot of doors in the Christian rap space. I was able to have guys like Zonti, Holvey, Paris Chariz, Miles Minnick, DKG Kai. I had several guys that were mainstream in terms of CHH, bigger names in that space. That was the whole first year, basically, from the beginning. And I felt like God was telling me, if you trust me, these are the type of doors that I can open. That might not make any sense to you, but I can make them happen. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. I can make these things happen. And then as I got into this year, into the second year of the podcast, at the beginning of this year, I felt like the Lord was telling me, and I might have shared some of this stuff on here before. I'll be honest with you guys. I don't remember if I did or not. But if I didn't, just stick with me, because this might be for you. This might be something that God has placed on my spirit to talk about today, just specifically for you that's listening to this right now. And so you never know God, how God works. And so at the beginning of this year, I felt like God was telling me this was going to be the year that I was going to start talking outside of the podcast. And Kelly gave me this Bible. My wife gave me this Bible for Christmas. And I wrote a prayer in the beginning of the Bible. And I haven't really went back a lot and read it up until the other day. But on one of the front pages of my Bible, I wrote, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it. It just says, keep going, don't ever stop. Keep going, don't ever stop. It's gonna be tough. Satan's gonna be throwing things at you, but don't ever stop. And so I just wanted to read a little bit of this prayer that I wrote in the front of my Bible, and it's all going somewhere. Trust me, this is not just me, hey, let me read you all a prayer. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically at the beginning of my Bible, I just wrote a prayer and asked the Lord to give me opportunities. At this time, I wrote this in December of 2023, and so I didn't know what was going to come in 2024. And so I asked God for opportunities that I would be able to read this Bible at spaces and churches that I never thought about before, for gatherings, events, and stuff like that. And that the Lord would open up that door and that I would be able to use this Bible to speak out of. And I asked the Lord also for another thing, for fresh understanding of his word, a fresher understanding of his word through the reading of this Bible, that those things would come along with this Bible that I had. And so at the beginning of this year, I started reaching out to some churches, right? And because I knew God had called me to speak. And I felt like God had called me or told me that I was going to start speaking outside of the podcast. And so I just looked at some churches in this area and I sent them emails and I was like, hey, this is who I am. This is my podcast. Here's the links. I would love to come share my testimony, on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, or if you guys need somebody to cover for, a pastor, if you don't have anybody, like, I would love to come share my testimony, even if it's for the youth or whatever the case may be. I would love to come share it, maybe encourage you guys. And so I reached out to about 10 or 15 churches and I did not hear anything back. Well, then, little bit goes by and I'm praying and I'm asking God, I'm like, hey, what's the deal? I'm not, I'm trying to be proactive and reach out to these different churches and all of those things. And you're not opening any doors. And I felt like, this is what you were calling me to do. And then at that time I started reading, Psalm chapter 40. Psalm chapter 40, David says, I waited patiently for the Lord. And January 24th, 2024, I wrote in my Bible, I keep running into this thought, waiting on the Lord. And so now I waited on the Lord. And so now what I'm going to do through that waiting on the Lord in that time is I'm going to try to prepare, because when those moments come that God gives me, I have to be ready for them. And so I just said, Lord, I know what you've told me. I'm going to do what I can do in the meantime to make sure that I'm prepared and I'm ready for when you open those doors. And so I started studying the word more. I started seeing that God was putting me into positions where I was able to kind of be in the word, be consumed with the word more. And I started praying and asking God for a newer desire, newer hunger, and a newer thirst for reading his word. And so a little while later, I've told this story on here. I do know I've told this story on here before. My pastor asked me to lead the Sunday night discussion at our church. And so I did that. And then it opened the door to me doing a Wednesday night for him, for our one of our classes at our church. And then it kind of morphed into this thing. God opened this door to where I led that class the rest of the way. And we were going through this book called Knowing God. It went from that to me doing all the stuff that I've done this summer, where we've went through the entire book of Galatians. And then a couple of weeks ago, I talked to my pastor, and my pastor said that they would love for me to do another class at my church. And so starting August the 14th, we're going to be going through the book of John. And so what I think is so beautiful about that is not only am I seeing my prayers answered, and it doesn't always look like the way that we think that they should be answered, right? Maybe not in the moment, but I am seeing the things happen that God placed on my spirit at the beginning of this year. I didn't know how they were going to come. I just knew that God was telling me I was going to start speaking outside of the podcast, right? And so I wrote in the front of my Bible that I would get new opportunities to speak. Well, I've been speaking every single Wednesday night all summer long, and now I'm going to get the opportunity to speak up until I think it's like 15 weeks, so 15 straight weeks where I'm going to get the opportunity to do that. And then I prayed for fresh understanding of his word. Well, you can't get any fresher than breaking down every single verse in the book of wherever you're studying. So we literally went through the entire book of Galatians, every single verse, right? And so we're going to read about Galatians chapter 6 here in a second. But now we're moving on into the book of John, and we're going to break down. I'm going to attempt to. I got 15 weeks and 21 chapters. I don't know that we'll break down every single verse, but we're going to break down the best that we can the entire book of John. So you cannot get any fresher understanding of his word by studying you know what I'm saying? Like we're going to be doing that. And so then last last Saturday, I had to work. And so I woke up. By the time I got done with work, it was around 5:30 in the morning. I got home, went to sleep, woke up, and my wife says, "Hey, can you go to Whitwell and get a goat?" And so my wife bought a goat. We have some chickens in the backyard, and now we got a goat. And I said, "Yeah, I'll go get it for you and whatnot." And so I went to her parents' house. That's a very local reference. Whitwell, if you're not familiar with the Chattanooga area or Tennessee or anything like that, I live in Soddy Daisy, Tennessee. Whitwell is about an hour from where I live. And so I went to her parents' house and got a cage, went to Whitwell, got the goat, came back, put the goat in the backyard and stuff like that, and then took the cage back to her parents. And around this time, this was a Saturday night, it was around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm taking the stuff back to her parents, right? And I get a text from my pastor. And he says, "Hey, I know it's super late notice. I apologize, but can you lead Sunday school in the morning?" And I just texted him back and I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. What's the passage?" And he sends me back, it's James chapter, I believe it's 3, 7 through 12. And he's like, if you can, I hate to do this to you last second. I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. I would love to do it." And so I got home that night, was super, super short notice, obviously, but it was a crazy night because I studied for that. I did this podcast. I edited this podcast, and it was just like, I had to work that morning and went and got a goat. So it was such a long day, but just to be able to see, we have to be ready at all times because you never know when God's going to open that door for the thing that you've been praying for. Like I've been praying for opportunity. Are you going to be ready when those opportunities come? Like I'm saying, we're not just supposed to sit on our hands and wait for God to do something. We're supposed to prepare our minds, prepare our spirits, prepare these things ahead of time. So when they come, it doesn't catch you by surprise. You knew it was coming because you've been praying for it, and you trust that God hears your prayers, and you trust that He, if it is something that is inside His will, is going to make happen in your life. And I remember hearing this over and over again as I drove home from her parents' house and I started to prepare for my doing the Sunday school class the next morning. I remember just hearing that over and over again. If they give me this chance, they're never going to take me off of this because I know I'm going to bring fire. I know that what God has put inside of me, it cannot be stopped. It cannot be quenched. So I said, I know. And I remember just thinking it. And that's why I played this video today because that's how it should be in our lives. We should be so consumed with wanting to please God that we say, if you give me this opportunity, nobody's going to take it away from me. Because in that moment, that Sunday school class was not meant for my pastor in that moment. There was actually a guy that was supposed to substitute for him because my pastor was out of town and the usual guy that takes his place, he was sick. Well, that day was never meant for that guy. There was only one person in all of creation that was meant for that specific moment, and that was me in that moment. And there are moments for you each and every day that God has designed so uniquely for you that nobody else can do. It's for you to do. It's for your shoes to fill. Right, your feet to fill those shoes, I mean. You know what I'm saying? And so as I prepared and my wife asked me, was I a little bit nervous? I said, the only thing I'm nervous about is I don't know everybody's name in there, and not everybody in the Sunday school class knows me. It's one of the bigger Sunday school classes in our church. And I was like, so when I get up there and do prayer requests, some of the people might be like, who is this guy? And so that was the first thing I said when I got up there. I'm like, I know some of you guys don't know me. Patrick's obviously not here, who's our pastor. And then Tim, who was the guy that was supposed to, substitute for him, is out. I said, so the C team is in today. And, Tom Brady talked about him being, seventh string. And then there was 3 other quarterbacks that it was ahead of him on the Patriots. And that's how I feel in my life. I know that I might not be someone who someone would look at and say, oh yeah, that is that type of guy that God's going to use. But Scripture tells us, I can't remember the exact reference off the top of my head, but God uses the foolish things, uses things that people don't think could be used, and those are the things that He brings up and kind of shows His power through them. You know what I'm saying? And so through all of this, through this testimony, through the things that I'm sharing, I just want to read the end, well, I guess not the end, about the middle verse of Psalms chapter 40, because while we wait patiently on the Lord, when the Lord finally brings whatever it is that you feel like He's placed on your life, when He finally brings that, we're supposed to share it with people. In verse number 5 of chapter 40, David said, "You have multiplied, O Lord, my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts toward me. None can compare with you. I will proclaim and tell of them, yet there are more than can be told." There are so many things that God does each and every day for us that we are supposed to not only thank him for, but show our appreciation to him by sharing that with other people, your testimony, your story, and point back to him and say, this is what God's doing in my life. And so just to further show you that point, to show that God really does answer prayers and God will give opportunities if you kind of put yourself into a position that you're ready for those things, right? Because God doesn't want, I'm not speaking on behalf of God here, but I feel like God is not going to put us into a position that makes him look like an idiot. If that makes sense. Hopefully I'm saying that the right way. Like, say for instance, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I know that your job is hiring. Is there any way that you could go talk me up to your boss? Well, if you know that this person sucks as an employee, you're not going to be willing to do that because it's going to look bad on you. I feel like it's the same type of thing with God. You ask God for a specific thing, but God knows your heart and he knows how you work. And he knows, hey, if I give that to you, you're going to make me look like an idiot because you suck as an employee. You know what I'm saying? It's not the same thing. I know God doesn't tell us we suck, but I'm just saying from my mindset, that's how I look at it, is like, I want to make God proud when he gives me these opportunities. And I remember at that morning, last Sunday morning, as I was kind of reading over my notes again, because like I said, I had very limited prep time. But it went great. It was such a blessing. But I remember I was praying and I said, Lord, you have given me this opportunity. I want to give it back to you. I want to give it back to you because the only way that this thing is going to go in a positive direction is if you're in it. And so I'm not taking ownership of this. Like, I see you're giving it to me and I'm thankful for that. And I'm going to do my part, but I'm giving it back to you. Right. And you use it. You use me as a vessel to say whatever you would have me to say. The week before that, and this is the last testimony I'm going to share, and then we're going to get out of here. The week before that, I was talking to one of my oldest friends. I've known him more of my life than I haven't. His name is John Rector. Shout out to John. I don't know if he listens to these podcasts or not, but John Rector, he is the director of a place called the Union Gospel Mission. It's a place here in Chattanooga where a church that I grew up in, and is actually one of the middle schools and high schools that I went to before they shut down. The church was called Highland Park, and they had a ministry called the Union Gospel Mission. It basically helped guys that were homeless, guys that had just got out of jail, reform, like that kind of thing, and they helped them get jobs, helped them get back into society and that kind of thing, kind of get them back on their feet. Well, when the church shut down, John said, well, I don't want to shut down this ministry. I want to keep it going. So he kind of took it over, and I believe that was I want to say it was 2008 or 2010, something like that. So he's been kind of on his own doing it for 10 or 15 years, something like that. And so I was talking to him the other day, and we were kind of talking back and forth, and it kind of came up like for me to come speak at the mission. And so I'm going to do that on August 12th, and it just further goes to show that God will give opportunities. And I knew at the beginning of this year that God told me I was going to speak outside of the podcast, and now I'm getting an opportunity, not just at my church, which I'm extremely thankful for. And I don't mean this to say like if God only gave me this, but if the only door that God opened was to speak at my church, he has given me more than I even deserve by giving me that chance. But he is taking it a step further and giving me something outside of my church and speaking at this mission. And like I say, it's not one of those things that we're just supposed to hold on to and white knuckle these opportunities and these blessings that God gives us. But I remember talking to a guy from my church, and I'm not going to say his name on here because I didn't ask him if it was cool. I think he would be okay with me sharing this, but I had kind of been talking to another guy from my church, and he does music and stuff like that. And he was telling me how he was feeling a draw to do more in terms of ministry through music. And so I reached out to him. I'm like, hey man, God's given me this opportunity to go speak at this mission. Would you be willing to come with me, and you can do a couple of songs beforehand, that kind of thing. And so we're going to go together, and he's going to do some songs, and then I'm going to speak a little bit and just hopefully articulate and whatever it is that God has for me to say in that moment. But it's just one of those things that when you get a blessing from God, there's opportunity for you to bless other people as well. And, all of this just stemmed, all these thoughts just came from somebody giving me a desk. And so I thank you to Angie and Tim Beaver. But I do want to look at Galatians really quick before we head out, because this is one thing that I don't want anybody here to miss. That the only way that you're going to receive a harvest, the only way that you're going to see a blessing from God, and I'm not talking about what is it called, and I forget what it's even called, like the Joel Osteen type, manifesting money and all the, I can't even remember what it's called. where you promise people, hey, if you become a Christian, you're going to become rich and all of those things, whatever it's called. Prosperity gospel. There it is. This is not prosperity gospel, but this is one of those things that, like I said, God has built into the fabric of creation that what you sow, you will reap. Galatians 6, I want to say it's 7 through 9. Yeah. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And this is the key part right here. Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. If we do not give up, that is the key right there. In its time, in its day, in its moment that God has predestined from the beginning of time, it will come if you do not give up. So don't get tired of doing good. Don't get tired of what is considered the mundane, or you say, I'm doing the same thing and I'm not seeing any results. You're getting a little bit better. That should be the goal. And you should be getting a little bit better, a little bit closer to God every day and saying, Lord, when you give me this opportunity, I'm ready. And so I say all that to say, I don't think that this is going to be the end of episodes like this where I share testimonies of now God's given me the opportunity to speak here, or now God's given me the opportunity to speak there. I do believe that I don't know when, but I believe at some point God's going to give me the opportunity to speak at places, at conferences, at churches around this world. Because I do believe that God's told me that I'm going to be able to have an effect on millions of people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I'm not going to stop until I get to that point. And I've been telling God and talking to God and praying about this every single day and saying, Lord, I'm not going to stop until you tell me to stop. And he tells us in Matthew chapter 28 to fulfill the Great Commission. What is the Great Commission? Go into all the world and preach the gospel. And so I want to put that over you right now. Don't stop. Don't ever stop. Doesn't matter how hard it gets. It doesn't matter if you're not seeing any fruit. It doesn't matter if you're seeing any growth. It doesn't matter if you're someone who's specifically doing like I'm doing and doing a podcast, and you're saying, man, when I started out, I had 50 listeners, and then I got to 75, and then I got to 100, and then I got to 200. Well, then it went back down to 150, and then it went back down to 100, and now it's at 75, and now I'm only having about 30 a week. It went up and down, up and down. Don't ever stop, because you never know, for one, who needs your voice. But two, what is God going to do through that testimony, through that perseverance, to where in 5 years from now, you could tell that person, yeah, I saw that steady growth, but then it fell off. But then I kept going because I knew that was what God was calling me to do. And now it's opened up this door for this. It's all for something, right? It's all for something. God is not going to throw anything by the wayside. There's always something that you can do with every situation that God gives you, every experience, every opportunity. So don't stop. Keep going. God bless you guys. Hope you all have a great week.